One day, I was talking with a cousin of mine who happens to be an avowed atheist. And on this particular day, we were talking about faith and religion. Now, my cousin responded with something to the effect of, I don't need God in order to have a good life. I love my life. So I looked at my cousin and I said, do you know what atheists and Christians have in common? He looked at me a little suspiciously, but he was curious. So he said, okay, what do we have in common? To which I replied, what you and I have in common is that both of us are going to die. Let me pause here for a moment. The intro to this quarter's lesson addresses this idea because of sin, everything dies. We call it the curse of sin. Everything sin touches becomes corrupt and it dies. As the author of this quarter's lesson points out, even the trees which do not and cannot sin, they eventually die. Why? Because even the trees are affected by this curse. This quarter, we're going to look at where did this curse of sin come from? How did it find its way to planet Earth? Does everybody have to die? And by the way, what happens when you do die? Okay, back to my cousin. I told him that what we have in common is that we're both going to die. Now, if he is correct, then when we die, they put us in the grave and we become either food for worms and eventually we go on to become cosmic dust. And in the end, we both would remain dead and both of us, well, we would have lost nothing. He thought about that for a moment and I could see his face and that this idea of dying and ceasing to exist was not a happy thought for him. This idea of being dead and spending eternity in a grave didn't give him much hope. But what is hope? When you really think about it, what gives us hope? Again, in this introduction to the lesson, the author quotes Swiss theologian Emil Brunner, who said, what oxygen is for the lungs, such is hope for the meaning of human life. He goes on to end his thought with these words. As the fate of the human organism is dependent on the supply of oxygen, so the fate of humanity is dependent on its supply of hope. Now, according to Brunner, our very survival as a species is tied to this idea of hope. As I was speaking to my cousin, he didn't have much hope. And how could he? I mean, after all, at the end of his so-called great life, what was waiting for him was the cold, empty darkness of the grave. So I continued, if you're right, we both die and both spend eternity in the grave. But what if I'm right and there is a God who loves me and has promised me that even if I die, I will live again? Which means if I'm right and there is a God, then unlike you, I have a way out of the grave, and his name is Jesus Christ. I will live one eternal life, and you will have lost everything forever. Our lesson this quarter revisits the great controversy, this battle between good and evil, the battle between Christ and Satan himself. We're going to examine the origin of sin and death and its effects on our life today. But more than that, we're going to look at God's solution to our sin problem and his desire to return us to the paradise we were created for. A paradise with no more sin, and along with it, no more pain, suffering, or death. A promise of a paradise to come, and that gives us hope. Thank you for joining us. We're looking forward to sharing with you our Sabbath School nuggets and studying the Sabbath School together with you this quarter. Take care. God bless.